To be totally honest with you, you don't want to buy any VCR.
There's no more demand for VHS anymore.
VHS players became the hottest toy in town and redefined home entertainment. But by the late 1980s, pop culture has poked fun at VHS for years.
Hey everybody, welcome to VHS. I'm one of your hosts, Chris, and joining me as always is Michael.
Hey everyone.
And of course we have John back again. John, how you doing?
How are y'all?
Doing good, doing good.
Doing good.
This is our quarantine episode. Hope everybody's, staying safe. If you have to go out, hope you're, taking, precautions and measures and everything. So, we're not going to let a little thing like this prevent us from recording a podcast. So here we are. So Michael actually came up with tonight's topic. We are going to discuss movies through the decade of the 80s.
Yes.
And each of us got picked certain years. And we'll go chronologically. Before we get into it, I grew up in the 80s, so this is really a nostalgia thing for me. So what I would like to know as two millennials, and we're going to start with John. Do you feel that 80s horror is overrated, or do you think that horror fans, it's justified? And what is the appeal to horror for you personally?
So do I think it's overrated? Definitely not. I think that the 1980s was a kind of the epicenter of horror. It kind of began what we know as modern horror, and most influences in most horror films today were inspired by films from the 80s, whether it be impartial or completely inspired by. So I think that the 1980s are not just a good time for horror films in general. I think they were the start of horror in the sense that we know it. Of course, horror goes way back into when film first began, but I think the renaissance of horror was the 1980s, and that's kind of where it formed and defined itself into what we know it as today. The appeal of it for me is just how creative people in the 80s were. You got the biggest hitters in horror today, like Michael Myers, Freddy Krueger, Jason Voorhees, the Blob, all these characters, they were bred from the 1980s, from someone's creative mind, and those characters, those slashers, those horror films alone have influenced generations of people, whether you grew up in that time period or not. Like me, born in 87, so like I was at the very tail end, so before I even realized what films were, I was past the 80s. So looking back on it, I think that some of my favorite films of all time are 80s horror because of the creativity of it, because of the practical effects. That's a big part of why I loved 80s horror, is they found ways to make these creatures real. And let's see, do I think that there's an appeal to it today? Yeah, definitely. It's timeless in many cases, and in many cases not, but you can rewatch the original Nightmare on Elm Street, and it may be using things like rotary phones and stuff that they don't have today, but I think that idea of someone killing in your dreams is something that can frighten you forever, because everybody sleeps, everybody dreams for the rest of their lives. So I just 1980s horror is the best time for me, I think, for horror films.
Okay, Michael, we'll turn it over to you. Do you think 80s horror movies, it's pretty beloved, like I said, within the horror community. Do you think it's A, overrated, and B, what are your thoughts on 80s horror?
I do not think the 80s is overrated. I think the best made and produced horror films ever are from the 80s, and it goes back to, like John had mentioned, the practical effects and how each movie and each special effects person tried to one-up each other, and they didn't take no for an answer. If somebody wanted something done, they were going to figure out a way to do it. and I think that was amazing. I also think it's a product of the times. It was Reagan was president at the time. You had a lot of turmoil, and it seems to be when there's a lot of turmoil in the real world, the horror genre has a huge resurgence, and people want that escapism to get away from real life. And what
plus,
better way?
Well, not horror, but just art in general can be a reflection on what's currently going on at that time too.
Yeah.
And I think it's awesome. If you have ever been to a horror convention, I would say a good 70-80% of the guests are always people from the 80s. That just, so there's just that, there's something about that time where you had, I would say, from the early to mid 80s where it was like serious horror. And then from like mid 80s to late 80s, it kind of veered off and went to like the comic route.
Yeah.
You know, and I do like that, and I do appreciate it, but I prefer full on horror, serious horror, whether or not I don't know how people view the 80s as far. Well, I'm saying full blown on horror seriously versus comedic horror. But I think there's room for both, obviously. So let's go ahead and jump straight into our list for this podcast. So we're covering everything from 1980 to 89.
Yep.
And who got 1980?
I did.
John, start with 1980. You give us your movie, and then maybe me and Michael can chime in and give our opinions of that movie.
Sounds good. So what I did was I looked at all the horror films that were released that year and tried to narrow it down. The thing is, in the 1980s, every year was a heavy hitter. There was at least 2 or 3, at the minimum, good horror movies that came out. So each year that I found myself having to narrow it down based on one factor or another. So I have my honorable mentions here, but I have my overall pick that I picked for the year. So for 1980, my overall pick was The Shining, starring Jack Nicholson, based off of the Stanley Kubrick film that's based off the Stephen King novel of the same name. And the reason I picked that one is because I think there's something about the idea of a family going to that cabin, and it's so prominent to like a lot of mainstream horror today, and it affected me in many ways. I remember reading the book and watching the film and loving Jack Nicholson's portrayal of Jack Torrance and all that. But ultimately, that is what I felt for me was my favorite film of that year. Now, my honorable mentions of that year is the original Friday the 13th and The Fog. So the reason why Friday the 13th, The Fog didn't win is because I think Friday the 13th, as good as it was and as classic of a film was, I don't think the movie, the Friday the 13th series really picked up its stride until probably the second film. So The Shining was a one-off film. It didn't kick off a franchise. It wasn't trying to set up anything. It was a recreation of a already well-established horror novel. So it had a lot of already good elements going for it. And rewatchability, I think I've watched The Shining probably 20 times more than The Fog or Friday the 13th combined. So when looking at all the facts for that, The Shining is what my pick of the year was.
Michael, any thoughts on The Shining?
Oh no, I love The Shining. I love everything about it. I even love the history about it. How Kubrick tortured Shelley Duvall to try and pull that performance out of her, and her hair fell out, and I mean that's awful. It's cinematic history.
Very much the Quentin Tarantino of the 1980s. He abused women for roles.
Oh yeah,
absolutely.
And she got it bad, from what I've read.
Oh yeah, she was mentally scarred for years after that film.
So I do like the movie. My only problem with the movie is Jack Nicholson performance. He
Really?
already. Well, no, let me finish. It's fine.
A bold
The only
statement.
thing is, well, the only thing with it is he already seems like he's crazy when you first see him. Whereas in the
So you don't
book,
get him yeah.
I don't get the sense that he like evolves into crazy, and it's just his performance, and
Yeah.
it's not a bad thing. I think his performance is great. I love the movie, but when you read the book and then you watch the movie, they're almost two completely separate.
No, they really are. It's hard to compare the two because Stanley Kubrick took a lot of creative liberties with that novel, and I think ultimately Jack Nicholson looking crazy from the beginning kind of ties in with his uh, idea that Jack Nicholson had been there and was like this weird, some kind of reincarnated soul from the hotel from years past or something like that. So, which isn't really established in the novel. So I think, when you compare them that way, it's hard to really get an idea of the film because it is, like you
Sure.
said, it's a completely different monster than what the novel itself was.
Oh, and again, I do enjoy the hell out of the movie. I'm just saying that that's one little thing that always kind of irked me about it.
Yeah.
Was was that. Other than that, I think it's an awesome pick, though. So are we moving on to 1981?
1981, which is Chris.
That would be me.
I had a package. Sorry, that's why I'm going outside.
No worries.
No, that's fine.
Go ahead.
I'm going with the obvious, Evil Dead.
There you go, John. You got it.
Yeah.
I was so afraid that you weren't going to pick that, and I was going to get very upset if you didn't.
And I'll make it real brief. So I was a slasher guy until I met Producer D. He's the one that got me into Fangoria. He kind of broadened my horizons as far as horror goes. I remember when we first met, we had talked about horror, and I was bringing up Halloween, Friday the 13th, things like that, which he liked.
Mm-hmm.
He said, "Have you seen Evil Dead?" I was like, what the hell is this Evil Dead? He showed it to me. And I understand if you look at that movie today, I can understand it looking campy and hokey and the effects, but for someone that's 12 years old back in the early 80s that's watching this movie, that movie was creepy as fuck.
Yeah.
It is a very, very creepy movie. There are still certain scenes that kind of disturb me a little bit. Who is it? Is it Linda that's in the basement? Who's in the basement?
No, Linda was the boyfriend, the girlfriend.
Yeah.
Right.
So it was.
The one that's in the basement. There's a scene in the original Evil Dead.
That's the sister.
It's Shelley.
Where?
No. Yeah. God, I should know this.
Anyway, there's a scene in the movie where someone's in the basement, and there's a shot of Ash dragging a body across the floor, and it's a floor shot, and it's got her in the cellar, but the cellar's like opened, and she's looking dead at the camera the whole time as Ash is like dragging this body. All you see is his feet and this body dragging across. But the whole time, it's got her in the cellar just looking dead at the camera. And even though he passes the camera with the body, it froze there for like a good 20, 30 seconds where it's just like her looking at the camera. And that is just a creepy fucking scene for me. So yeah, that like really opened the door for horror wasn't just slashers. I mean, I was aware of, The Exorcist, Night of the Living Dead, but that really opened the floodgate to horror, and I'm so very appreciative for Dee showing me that movie, and I still love it. I love it better than Evil Dead 2. I love it better than Army of Darkness. Um, it went the comic route at that point, and I do like those movies. I do, but that's what I like about the remake of Evil Dead, because it went back to the basics of just full on horror. So that's what do you guys think of Evil Dead?
So Evil Dead is like the whole franchise is one of my favorite horror franchise that exists. Now, for me, like I do personally, like I think I like Evil Dead more of all of the series of the movies. I like the second one the best, just because for me there's a lot of just very prominent shots and scenes that I love over the first one, like the scene where his hand gets possessed and he's like beating the crap out of himself with the plates in the kitchen. Like that is all Bruce Campbell doing that physical attack. He's fighting himself basically, and that is what made me fall in love with acting to begin with. I have a theater background, so like that is what kind of kicked it off for me. And his birthday is actually a day after mine, so fun fact. But Evil Dead is one of those like one of my all-time, like one of my best pieces of work that I have is this old VHS tape right here that I recorded years ago on an old VCR of the original Evil Dead Uncut. It was on IFC back whenever IFC was still commercial free and they hadn't sold out. And I stayed up late one night, and this was, I don't know, probably late 90s. I stayed up and recorded it on the TV on my VCR, and I've watched that version more than I've watched any version that has come out, Blu-ray, DVD, any version, just because it's something about it being on a scratchy VHS tape really adds to that horror element to it. And actually, like last year, they re-released it. It was at the Belcourt Theater for their Horror Midnight. And
I remember that. Mm-hmm.
the original composer, Joseph DeLuca, actually went back and recomposed the entire film. And you want to talk about like seeing a film for like that you've seen 100 times for the first time. Just the fact the music was different and more atmospheric and had so many more layers. To me, it became bigger than I could have ever imagined it being. It was much more scarier. And even though I knew what was about to come around the corner, I knew that Shelley was about to bust out of the basement. I knew that somebody was about to bust through the door. The music, like there's these very, very distinct string sounds that he would put throughout the entire scoring of the film that just added a whole nother layer of horror to it. So yeah, I love Evil Dead. I could go on about it all night, but I'll let you have it now, Michael.
Oh, I'm a huge fan. I'm going to keep it sweet and simple. I'm a huge fan. I love it. My honorable mention for 81 would be The Howling, though. I'll leave it at that.
That's a good one.
That's a good one, yeah.
And John, you mentioned the score, and Michael, me and Michael discussed this a while back. They just recently re-released the score to Evil Dead, where he went back and re-recorded it, because apparently when they originally filmed it, the score and the sound effects were on the same track. So if you own an original copy of the soundtrack, it's got the sound effects with it. So apparently he went back and re-recorded it for that purpose. Which, Michael, you do have that, right?
I do. I have the first and second on vinyl.
I actually got the second one at the Groove, so
Yay! They're releasing Army of Darkness at Record Store Day if we ever get Record Store Day.
What? I'm gonna be there. I'm gonna be there.
All right, we are at what, 1982?
We're back to John. I don't come in till 86, so I'm just gonna sit here.
Oh my God!
Yeah. So 82 was a hard year in many cases, because 3 of my favorite horror films were in 1982. So this was the one that gave me probably the biggest headache of the 3 years that I had. Ultimately, my winner of that year was John Carpenter's The Thing.
Nice.
And it's because ultimately, when I thought about the others that I chose in my honorable mentions, The Thing is one of my not just favorite horror films. It's one of my favorite films. Period. I think it's just classic John Carpenter horror. It's got some of the best practical effects in cinema. The story, the characters, everything about that movie is just great. I rewatch it yearly, all the time, and I've probably got 5 different copies of that film on either a re-release or a new edition. Because I love that film so much. So John Carpenter's Thing is definitely my winner of 1982. My honorable mention was the original, the first Poltergeist film, the first Creepshow film, and Friday the 13th Part 3. All 3 of those films I love dearly. And so I was sitting here with all 4 of these looking, I'm going, man, I don't know what to pick. I love Creepshow so much. I love Friday the 13th Part 3. In fact, The Groove, whenever y'all got that Waxwork release of it, I saw it in your Instagram story, and I think I messaged you, Michael, was like, you hold that for me, I'll be there in a few hours. So
I think Chris is holding it up.
Yeah, so that right there, I love it so much. So that was a very difficult year for me to pick. But The Thing ultimately, when I boiled it down to characters or story or just every possible angle, The Thing came out on top. So that is my pick for 1982.
Great choice. I agree with all of them and your honorable mentions. Chris.
I'll tell you though.
Well, I was going to say, I think John is being a little biased because of his love of Kurt Russell.
No, don't you break my love of Kurt Russell into this.
Sure.
Many variables boiled down into this decision, but that is the reason why it won.
Totally kidding. It's a fucking awesome movie. I totally agree. I agree. Thing is fucking awesome. Friday the 13th Part 3. I absolutely love that movie. I won't get into it, but it's an awesome movie as well. But yeah, The Thing, that's an awesome pick.
Yeah, definitely. I think one of my favorite things from that entire film was I was watching an interview with John Carpenter and Kurt Russell. It was years ago, but they were talking about the practical effects of the film and how horror has changed. I think it was around the time that the new one came out, and I think 2006 or whatever it was, whatever year that sequel or prequel came out. And most of that film was CGI, and they were asking, like, what do you think about how horror has changed and practical effects? And he goes, in the 1980s, we just built all this stuff as best we could. And then he said, we were burning materials that we probably shouldn't have been breathing the fumes from, but we were sitting there just blowing with a blowtorch and just like filming it. All right, load it up, let's do it again. There's no telling what underlying diseases that we all have from that film just from burning these materials. And I love that. And he was like, sometimes you got to do the work.
Yeah. That's a great.
All right, so what year are we at now?
1983, which is back to you, Chris.
Is it back to me?
Yeah, John gave it to you.
I thought it was 84.
You have 84, but Chris, if you read the text today, John said Chris can have 1983.
Oh my God.
Did you not look go for it?
I've got it right here. I've got it. All right.
He didn't read the text.
I did. I've got my movie. So, my pick for 83 to go along with John would be John Carpenter's Christine.
Okay. All right.
It was really a toss-up between Christine and where's my other one at? Videodrome. Those 2 movies. It was a toss-up. Yeah. Ultimately,
it would have been in there.
What's that?
I would have thought Sleepaway Camp and Cujo would have been in there.
Cujo was a close, and you may not know this. Michael does. I don't care for Sleepaway Camp at all.
Yeah, I didn't know that.
Don't care. The sequel, I absolutely love. The original, I don't. But going to
Fair.
Christine, you know, it's a worm turns movie where you have your protagonist that's getting bullied and beat up on, that ends up becoming, greater than what he was. Any John Carpenter movie, the score is always awesome. It may be a nostalgia thing for me. Most of these 80s movies are. But I just enjoy it. The fact of a car being possessed, I think that is just fucking awesome. Do you guys have any thoughts on Christine? Or?
I love Christine. I didn't care much for the film itself. I mean, I like it, but it's not my favorite King adaptation. I love the novel. I remember there was a point in time in college when I sat down and just read through a majority of Stephen King's works, and Christine was one of my favorites that he did. But I did like the film itself. I hadn't seen it as much as some of his other adaptations, and
Sure.
in fact, but it is good. It is a good solid pick. So I don't say that was a bad choice at all.
Well, let me ask you this: when I picked that, what were you thinking for '83?
Well, I was thinking of the two King novel or like adaptations that came out that year. I figured Cujo would have gotten it because I think Cujo is just as a classic horror film. I mean, it's very simplistic, but the idea of a rabies-infested dog killing people. Some people still talk about that film. And like I still hear people sometimes refer to crazy dogs as Cujos. So,
sure.
And Dee Wallace gave a great performance.
Mm-hmm. So I was thinking Cujo probably. That would have been my guess, but Christine's a good one, yeah.
No, I just always enjoy a good worm turns movie. You got Lawnmower Man. You got one of Michael's favorite movies, Evil Speak. That's a good worm turns movie.
I do like Speak.
Yeah. So now where are we at? That was 83. We're at 84.
It's you again.
It's me again.
It's gonna be
84 would be a hard year.
84 is a hard year. I'm actually glad I didn't get that one because there's a lot of stuff that came out in 1984.
Okay. So you have Gremlins. You have Ghostbusters.
Yes.
And it took me a minute to kind of really pick which one I would like. I've got an honorable mention, but I am going with A Nightmare on Elm Street.
Yes.
Classic.
Classic 80s horror slasher. Freddy was still Freddy as far as scary. It wasn't until Nightmare on Elm Street 3 where he went the comic route, throwing out a bunch of one-liners, which is fine. Which is fine. That's what made Fred. That's where Freddy became Freddy.
Right.
That's what he was known for, and that's totally fine. And I like those movies, but again, it was that period in the '80s where it shifted from horror to horror comedy, which I can appreciate. But damn it, I just want my bloody horror movies. The comedy stuff is fine, but I want to be fucking scared. I want that Evil Dead, the first one. I want that Nightmare on Elm Street. Even Nightmare on Elm Street 2 was still in that tone of seriousness. It wasn't until New Nightmare where it kind of went back to the serious tone. But it was one of those, it was original, the boogeyman in your dreams. I absolutely love that movie. Any thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street from Michael?
No, I am not surprised that that's what you picked, just because that's a classic slasher, an original that spawned a huge franchise. It's Wes Craven. No, I'm not surprised at all. And I think it's a perfect pick. Like I said,
Yeah.
there's tons of movies that I could pick. You mentioned Gremlins. I love Chud, and I love Night of the Comet, all from 1984. That's a hard year.
The hard year was a very hard year.
So and I'll throw this out real quick. My honorable mention was actually going to be, or it is, Night of the Comet, because it was kind of like your first PG-13 horror film. And it starts off, it's the end of the world, it's the apocalypse, and, you got these young kids and they're running around just having a blast. But then you have, like, this group of guys that are semi-zombie, kind of semi-radioactive. They're fucked up and they're out to kill them. So it kind of takes a turn to where it kind of turns into a horror movie. So I remember watching the fuck out of that movie. So honestly, A Nightmare on Elm Street is definitely at the top for that year, but I have to say, Night of the Comet was like, it was snugging right up against it. John, do you have any thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street or Night of the Comet?
Do I have a lot of thoughts on Nightmare on Elm Street? Other than, y'all know me for my Michael Myers. I think that's how we initially met. But Freddy Krueger is probably my second. Yeah, it's definitely my second favorite horror creation that's ever been conceived. I just love. I love him when he was scary. I love him when he was comedic. Like my favorite, like you mentioned, the Nightmare on Elm Street 3, the Dream Warriors. Like that is my favorite nightmare film. So I love just the idea of a dreamscape, just the clever kills, welcome to prime time, bitch. I love that. Like I know it's goofy, but I love it. I love it so much. And like this year, if we ever get a Halloween, I plan on doing Freddy Krueger because I've been working on my costume since last year. And
spoiler
alert! I'm gonna be Michael, maybe definitely Freddy Krueger for most of Halloween this year. So yeah, surprise. But yeah, right. I love Nightmare on Elm Street. I think Wes Craven really nailed it. I think the idea that he came up with this, and I think the story is he came up with it in a dream. He dreamt about it or based it off of somebody that he knew or something like that. It's that simple idea of taking real life and turning it into something horrific. And he really did it well. Wes Craven's always been a master creator at horror, and Nightmare on Elm Street is going to be forever cemented. And the Mount Rushmore of horror, Freddy Krueger's face is definitely on it. So, yeah, I love it, and I'm glad that's what you picked because that's what I would have picked.
We're on 1985.
Hard year again.
It was. It really was. I'm looking at the list of movies, and again, A Nightmare on Elm Street 2. I think that's a solid movie, personally. You've got one of my two favorite Argento films, Phenomena, which I absolutely love. But you got Fright Night.
That's right.
Come on.
One of my favorites.
No whammies. Come on, say my favorite.
Yeah. All right. So I am going with Day of the Dead.
Oh, man.
What were you thinking, John?
Return of the Living Dead.
Yes. That's what I was thinking, too.
Okay. That is a great movie. I enjoy the hell out of it. But again, as far as horror goes, I tend to lean towards the more serious horror as opposed to the comedy horror. I do enjoy comedy horror, but something about just straight on horror. And I actually think Day of the Dead it's vastly underrated. I think
I agree with that. I do agree with that. Yeah.
I think it's better than Dawn of the Dead. I think it is definitely better than Dawn. Don't get me wrong. I do enjoy Dawn of the Dead. You got the bikers in there and doing their thing. And I don't know, Day of the Dead I like the isolation. It's just this group that they're going out every once in a while, seeing if there's anybody left out there, and then coming back. And what was it? Oh, God. Joe Pilato is fucking awesome in that fucking movie. He plays the Captain Rhodes in it. He has some great fucking lines in that movie, but I don't know. I really like. Night of the Living Dead is my favorite. Day of the Dead would be next, and then followed up by Dawn of the Dead. I do love Return of the Living Dead, but I don't know. Day of the Dead is I think it's a vastly underrated movie as far as not only in the horror genre in general, but just within the Dead series. I think it's vastly underrated. Michael, what are your thoughts on Day of the Dead?
Are you going to take my horror card from me? I've never seen it.
Oh.
I've never seen it.
Wow.
I know. I'm shocked. Sorry, people. I know. I'm doing a horror podcast and I've never seen it.
Well, no. Let's be fair. I'm sure there are plenty of horror movies I haven't seen. Well, I didn't. I'd never seen Wendigo or Session 9 until Michael had me watch them. So,
yeah.
To be fair, and I'm not putting those up with Day of the Dead, but I'm just saying I get it because Michael does like horror. And I don't want to speak for you, Michael, but I mean, you tend to like comedy horror.
I do.
Return of the Living Dead.
That would have been my pick. So our Fright Night, because those two are right next to each other for me.
And both excellent movies. And I'll be honest, I did really struggle because there were a lot of good movies that came out that year, and I do enjoy all those movies. I just think Day of the Dead is it's just a great movie. John, what are your thoughts on Day of the Dead?
I'll keep it short because I have a lot of feelings about the Dead franchise. Because Night of the Living Dead was George A. Romero and Dan O'Bannon's brainchild, and so when they split off, George A. Romero made was Dawn of the Dead was next, right? Or was it Day of the Dead? Which came first? So he split off and made of the Dead series, and then Dan O'Bannon made Return of the Dead, which ultimately didn't really pan out as much as the George A. Romero films go because George A. Romero was just a better storyteller and director. But Return of the Living Dead, I would have picked just because, yeah, it does fall under that comedy horror kind of vibe. But for me, that is one of the few films I can remember as a child that gave me nightmares. It actually gave me I had nightmares of Tarman walking up my staircase in my childhood. So that film really he's creepy, yeah. So I mean he became goofy and kind of like the mascot of the rest of the B Return films that continued after that. But in that first film he was just legitimately pretty frightening. So but I can see where you're coming from with Day of the Dead. Now, I personally like with you, I like Day of the Dead over the Dawn of the Dead film, but I like the Dawn of the Dead remake better than the original, which I know
really
that's a good remake.
I like Zack Snyder's version much better than the original. Dawn of the Dead. I don't know. For me, I just feel. I love the original Dawn of the Dead, but I like the remake a lot more. For me, I feel like I choose to watch it over the original.
Let me say this. I will say that is definitely Snyder's best movie so far of all the movies he's done.
Definitely.
It's a good remake. I do. And I think for me, it's a nostalgia thing. I think I would lean towards the original more, and that's just clearly a nostalgia thing. I do enjoy watching the remake. I thought it was a fine remake. All right, so that was, where are we at now? 1986.
86 now, yeah.
1986.
Who's
Oh,
got
it's
that?
me. Look, I'm the first.
Yeah, welcome
my
back to the
first,
party. It's been forever.
right? This is my first one.
Is it real? No, you tell me
It
it's your
is.
first.
I have 86, 87, and 89. My
Okay.
first.
I didn't realize that was your first one. Wow, that's how deep into this we are. Wow. Well,
Over
welcome to the.
halfway through. Yes. So for 86, I think I'm gonna tell you my honorable mentions, and then I'll tell you what one ultimately I think is the best from 86. For my honorable mentions, I am gonna throw out Invaders from Mars. I love Toby Hooper, and I love Karen Black, and I enjoyed that movie a lot. I also enjoyed Night of the Creeps a lot. Little take on the zombie genre, and my Suzanne Snyder's in there, so I love that as well. But for me, I ultimately am picking Chopping Mall as my favorite movie from 1986, with a crush of Chris's, Kelly Maroney. And you also have another horror giant, a horror scream queen, Barbara Crampton, is in Chopping Mall as well. It's a simple story. It's about robots that, something go haywire and kill a bunch of kids in a mall. And I love the simplicity of the story, and the kills are fun as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I think I think it had its anniversary recently, a few days to a week ago, because I think I saw Kelly Maroney post about it. Am I right, Chris? Are you looking it up?
Oh, I'm just dreaming about Kelly Maroney. Sorry.
Aren't we
Sorry.
all?
I went to perv mode. Sorry, Kelly. I don't know. Do I need to check?
No, you don't need to check. I know it was recently. But I definitely go Chopping Mall. Some people might have gone with The Fly. That was good as well. I know John has a little crush on Gina Davis.
I do, and that's what I would have picked. You're not exactly right. That is exactly what I picked. Chopping Mall is not what I would. I mean, it would have made my honorable mentions probably, but I had so many more that year that I would have put in front of it.
Tell me what movies you would.
So you have, let's see, from least to most, probably Troll, Invaders from Mars,
Yep.
Friday the 13th, Jason Lives.
It's not someone has an opinion on that.
I don't know. Let's see. From Beyond is really good. And Aliens, even though that's more of a action film than is a horror film, I think it's like Aliens kind of fell into
sci-fi horror line right there.
Like the first Alien film was very much a horror film, but I think Aliens did creep more into action than it did horror. But Aliens would have been an honorable. But yeah, The Fly would have definitely been my top of that year. Critters was a good one. Critters was definitely a really good one. But I think The Fly, like for me, yeah, I would have chosen The Fly overall, just based on, again, like I'm a big practical effects guy, and any kind of movie that will gross me out in that sense or make me kind of scream, as well as having a good storyline will do that for me. So I think that's why I would have chosen The Fly.
Oh yeah, I don't disagree with you at all. Special effects and story definitely were better than Chopping Mall. I just enjoyed Chopping Mall more.
I mean, like, again, this is eye of the beholder kind of thing, but yeah, there's nothing wrong with that at all.
Chris, do you have anything to add, or?
I do like Chopping Mall. I also like The Hitcher.
Okay.
I've seen the remake of
The Hitcher. I've never seen.
Oh, you gotta watch the original. Rutger Hauer. Oh my God, he's such a creep. I think maybe Henry, Portrait of a Serial Killer.
I have heard that's good. I've never seen.
It is. It is really good. Um, but nothing. I mean, yeah. I'm sorry. Overdrive. I thought that was a fun movie.
I thought about that one. I didn't know if I should include it or not.
Oh yeah,
That was a
it's a
fun
fun
movie.
movie.
It's a fun film, but like
It
I
is.
just yeah.
But I mean, Night of the Creeps, Aliens, The Fly. But no, nothing wrong with Chopping Mall at all. Nothing wrong with
No,
that.
that's a solid pick. It's a solid pick, Michael. It is. It's a solid pick. Yeah, it's more of a deep cut, and I think with horror, that's kind of like where a lot of it lays down in these days.
Yeah.
Oh, sure. All right,
Yeah,
so
I like that. What you just said, John. I think most, like, a mainstream audience would know or have heard of The Fly. They probably have not heard of Chopping Mall.
Yeah. So I think like real horror fans, like that's where you look into those deep cut films that like those hidden gems that people like. Man, I love that film. Nobody saw that film. Like a prime example for me. I know a lot of people have seen it at this point, but when it came out, no one heard of it. That movie, The Faculty, that Robert Rodriguez film, kind of
Oh.
the
yeah,
Yeah.
the Alien of the Invasion of the Body Snatchers, kind of in a way soft remake. But that film for the longest time, nobody had heard of it, and I'd seen it numerous times. I loved it. And, I love alien films. That's one of my paranormal, like, if it's a bad movie, like Dark Skies is objectively a terrible film, but I love that film. But I love alien movies. So when The Faculty came out, I fell in love with it, but nobody had seen it for years. And then suddenly, I guess a surge of people just digging up these old films that were underappreciated. That was one that kind of became more mainstream. But yeah, so I think with horror, you really got to like give those hidden gems like Choppy Mall a more of a light, because that's the ones that people really enjoy deep down, not just what was big of the time.
Yeah.
but John, you also like Teen Witch, right?
I did. I did like.
Sorry.
But
All right.
it's for the same reason of like nostalgia. Like I grew up watching it, and it's it's a child's campy film. Like it's goofy, it's dumb,
I get it.
silly, but I love it. I love that film.
That's fine. That's fine.
I will forever be mad that they never did a Teen Universe film, because
Right.
They should have.
They missed a golden opportunity with
They
that.
did. They really did. All right, so
Great.
let's move on to where are we at? 1987.
7. Which is
Who has
me again.
87?
Which
You
is me.
again,
Oh
right?
my god!
2 in a row.
I'm looking at the list for 1987.
87, like
I'm
84
thinking-
and 85 were one of the hardest years for me, because there's so many movies I love in those years.
Not to cut you off, but
Yeah.
I'm looking at a very, very, very long list of
It
movies
is.
from 1987, and all I can think is, oh my god, what is he going to pick?
87 was tough. It's a tough
That is-
year.
Because there are so many heavy hitters in '87. So many heavy hitters.
So many. Could I go with Nightmare on Elm Street 3? Nope.
Please do.
Monster Squad, like it, but no. Lost Boys,
What?
I like that as well, but I'm not going to pick that. So here is my honorable mentions. The Gate.
Okay.
I love The Gate. And my other honorable mention is Hellraiser. I love Hellraiser.
Yeah.
So
Good.
my top from 87 is going to be Evil Dead 2.
Yeah.
I love Evil Dead 2. The first time I watched this movie, I was in high school, and I was out at my friend Holly's cabin out at Fort Peck Lake, and it was this whole experience. I'm in a cabin watching a movie about a guy in a cabin in the woods, and
What's
so
better than
many, as John has mentioned before, there's so many parts of that movie that stick out to me. His dead girlfriend Linda dancing around half skeleton out in the woods, his hand getting possessed, him losing his mind in the living room, and the deer and the clock and everything laughing at him. I love it. I love everything about Evil Dead 2.
It's so good. It's so good.
Yes. I love Evil Dead 2.
Like when he pops out, when his mirror reflection pops out, he goes, "We just cut up our girlfriend with a chainsaw. Does that sound fine?" Like, it's
Yeah.
so great. It's so It's so great. Evil Dead 2 is the best.
I love it. And that he has so many one-liners in that movie. You know,
Of course,
my
it's a
blue
comedy.
stick. Love it. It's horror.
Or like whenever they look at Professor Novi's ghost and Bobby Joe goes, "Quit holding my hand so tight." And he goes, "Baby, I'm holding your hand." She lifts her hand and she's holding Ash's possessed
Bobby
hand.
Joe.
Bobby Joe. Like, it's great. It's great. Like everything about Evil Dead 2 is cinematic gold. And I don't care what you say, Chris. You're
Henrietta.
wrong.
I mean, Henrietta. How amazing is Henrietta?
Seller.
Yeah.
Let me say, I do enjoy it. I enjoy the Army of Darkness. I mean, I do enjoy them. But again, I just lean more towards horror than horror comedy. So, like, I can easily take, like, Evil Dead 2 and lump it in the same bag as Gremlins. They're both horror comedies. And that's fine. That's fine.
Yeah.
I personally will win with Hellraiser myself.
It's on there. I love Hellraiser. I love
Yeah.
Hellraiser.
If Evil Dead 2 was released that year, I probably would have chosen either Hellraiser or Nightmare on Elm Street 3. Because, I mean, again, y'all know Nightmare on Elm Street 3 is my favorite. So, like, that's,
Sure.
yeah, that would have been a tough year for me.
And again, like horror comedy, it's not the fact that I hate them. I do enjoy them, but I lean more towards the serious horror as opposed to the comedy horror. Is all.
Yeah. And I
What
can
do you
see
feel
why.
What do you feel about Creepshow 2? That one came out that year, too.
I've never seen it.
It's good. I like it. It's not as good as
segments.
I think, like, for me in Creepshow 2, the best vignette of that film is, I think it's called The Lake. I think that's what they call it. But it's like,
Right.
like 5 kids go out into like this lake, and there's this amorphous like black goo, like tar, that's just floating along the surface of the water. It's sentient. It eats them one by one, and eventually they get trapped on this kind of wooden raft in the middle of the lake, because if they get in the water, it'll eat them. Like, it basically like dissolves them, and they come out like all skeletons and screaming and stuff like that. So they get trapped, and so they're trying to figure out how to get back to the mainland. But that one alone in Creepshow 2 is probably my favorite of the entire film. But it's definitely worth watching if you haven't seen it. I think you'd probably like it. It's not as, I don't think it's super comedic, but it's definitely got some good beats in there.
Yeah. I don't have to be all comedic. Chris is right. I do tend to lean more towards that, but I'll watch anything.
I mean, no, you're definitely not all comedic. I mean, and that's fine. I mean, everybody has their own thing, but I definitely wouldn't say that's your only genre, that you like of horror by any means. I mean, you like lots of different genres. So yeah, I just Evil Dead 2, I mean, it's a fun movie, but it's not scary. It's not scary.
Yeah.
And all right. So what do we have now? 1988.
We're back to John.
Back to me, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm going to pull a page out of Michael's book, and I'll do my honorable mentions first, because this year had a lot of heavy hitters and just films that I feel like are very like milestones or pinpoints in horror. So I think I'm going to start with my honorable mentions and then work up to what I chose. And I mean, I'm a little biased for what I chose, and I'm kind of burying the lead a little bit, but we'll get there. So my honorable mentions. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Again, not really a horror film, but again, not really a horror film. It's very goofy, very slapstick. It's become a cult hit. We all know Killer Clowns from Outer Space, but ultimately, I didn't pick that one. I wanted to, but I didn't. But that one's definitely up there. The Blob, another one, a very good film, horror film, but was my favorite. Hellraiser 2, which I think I like better than the first one.
Really?
I think
say that.
I like for me, I just feel like I like Hellraiser 2 better than Hellraiser 1. Like, I love Hellraiser 1, but I don't know, just something about Hellraiser 2 I just like a little bit more. I think for me, watch it will watch it more.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, then there's Halloween 4, the Return of Michael Myers. That was after they took their little break and did a Season of the Witch, and we're like, all right, everybody wants Michael to come back. So Halloween 4 is definitely an honorable mention. Child's Play, which again was the first that kicked off an entire franchise. But again, Child's Play 2 is not my favorite. I love Child's Play 1 is not my favorite. Child's Play 2 is my favorite of the franchise. I just think
I would agree with that. Yeah.
I think it's scarier. I think like the story is better. I think the horror is better. The scares are just the jumps and all that. Child's Play 1 is great, but I think it really hit its stride with the second one. But my pick of 1988 is Nightmare on Elm Street 4: The Dream Master, which ultimately is probably the worst of the Nightmare films. But I just love the franchise so much that even the worst, I just will win any of them because I love Nightmare on Elm Street. I love Freddy Krueger. I love his one-liners. I love everything. I love it, like all of it. Even the worst film beats out some of the heavy hitters of like The Blob and Halloween 4. I just love Nightmare on Elm Street that much as to why I chose The Dream Master, which to me again it's favorite. But to me, that's what I picked for 1988.
I take it Chris is not a fan the way he keeps shaking his head. And...
I know he hates it. I know he does. But that's what I picked.
We all have our cross to bear, and that's yours, I guess. Michael, I'll let you go first.
Do I really have to admit that I've never seen it?
Oh my God!
I have never seen Nightmare on Elm Street 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. No, I have seen 6 because that's New Nightmare, isn't it? Or is that 7?
This is the second movie.
There's Freddy's Revenge. There's the Dream Warriors. There's the Dream Child. There's the Dream Master. There's Freddy's Dead: The Final Nightmare. I think
Nocturnal Dream. Yeah.
Nocturnal Dream.
Nightmare.
Yeah. That's something you have at night. That's not a movie.
How would you know? You haven't seen them.
Red told me.
Maybe there is.
So that's the second movie that we've mentioned tonight you haven't seen, Michael.
Yeah,
and what? Yeah, and that it kind of. Did you really? I'm not telling you the story, so it doesn't matter. Why? I was very, very young. I was probably 5 or 6. What year did that? We're talking about 88 right now.
88.
Yeah, so I was probably 6, and my neighbor, this girl named Chelsea, was my same age, and she had an older brother, and he drug us over to their house one day and made us watch one of the Nightmare on Elm Street movies when I was 6, and it scared the shit out of me.
Yeah.
So I've never watched any of them after that.
So is there a movie from... Go ahead, John.
It's funny because one of my friends, he's the same way with Child's Play. Like his friends drug him over to watch the first one, and the Chucky doll scared him so much he's refused to watch them since then. And he's me. He's in his 30s now, so it's like, dude, you're older. You can watch a campy 80s film and not be scared to death. I promise you.
I need to watch
Michael, is there a movie from '88 that you would have picked?
My top favorite? Are you asking me? Right here. Killer Clowns from Outer Space. 100%. It is, not only would it be my top pick, it is like one of my favorite all-time movies.
When I saw it, I knew you were gonna. That's what you would have picked. I was like, man, I gotta make it an honorable. I can't. It's not a winner, but I've got to at least mention it.
Killer Clowns from Outer Space has like taken this. It's blown up. It is amazing to me. I remember seeing it on like HBO or something when I was young, probably in the early '90s, and it is huge. They're making Funko Pop figures. The last 2 years, it's had its own mazes at Universal Horror Nights. At Universal
That doesn't mean it's
Studios.
good.
Oh, it is good.
It doesn't mean it's good.
It's good. It is totally good. He's just trying to. He's being an asshole because he likes to try and
Troll
goad me and troll me.
with Sleepaway Camp 2, Unhappy Campers, which is a comedy. The Serpent and the Rainbow.
Mm.
I forgot about
What
that.
else?
Pumpkinhead. Pumpkinhead was good. I like a good creature feature.
What else do we
I
have?
wasn't gonna put. Almost put them on honorable mentions, but I've never been a fan of Pumpkinhead for some reason. It never
I
appealed
haven't
to me.
either. I agree. My top pick would probably be Halloween 4. Just the feel of it, it kind of went back to. I think it captures the atmosphere of the Halloween season. I thought it captured the Halloween season atmosphere a lot better than even the original Halloween. That's just my thoughts.
That's a fair assessment. I agree. I can agree with that. Yeah.
All right, so we are going to our last year, 1989. Who has that?
Me.
Do you? Well, yeah. The whole second half of the day.
Me. And let's be honest. Let's have an honest conversation. 1989 was like scraping the bottom of the barrel. You have this huge, amazing decade, and then we get to 89 and it's crap-tastic. It is. It is crap-tastic.
You're not wrong. You're not wrong.
It is. It's like, what the hell happened, 1989?
I
We're
mean,
supposed to end on a high, not a low.
Yeah,
But
they
you
shot
didn't enjoy. You didn't enjoy Chopper Chicks in Zombie Town?
I didn't, and I didn't, enjoy Grim Prairie Tales or Howling 5, The Rebirth.
What? Oh my god!
Yeah, Halloween 5: The Rebirth was just the revenge. Oh no, that was the revenge of Michael Myers, wasn't it? Like that one was bad too.
No, he's
That
saying
was-
Howling 5. Or he's saying
Halloween.
Halloween 5.
Oh, Halloween 5 also came out that year too, which is also a bad film.
For sure.
You had Nightmare on Elm Street 5, The Dream Child. You had. I'm going through the list.
Leviathan
Oh
was good.
You had 976 Evil, which wasn't a great movie, but you had Stephen Jeffries in it, who I like. Honestly,
You got this. I'm very sorry you got this because there's holy crap.
I mean, what do I pick? Amityville 4 or Howling 5? I mean, it was.
Okay.
What about
What
Bride
did
of
you
Reanimator?
pick? I see one I would pick.
I have a pick. I have a
What is
pick.
it?
It's Puppet Master.
Master was a good one.
I don't particularly like Puppet Master, but it was one of those, along with Leprechaun, I watched when I was really young, and it left an impression on me. I mean, you had Leech Woman and Blade and Tunneler, and it was interesting. And of course, it's Richard Band, and he makes all kinds of B-grade movies. But yeah, my pick was Puppet Master. It's not a great movie, but
It's not, but it's
interesting.
Stuff you have to work with. Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what film came out really a horror film, but like I would have mentioned saying like I wouldn't have like probably picked it. I would have honorable mentioned it because it's not really a horror film. It's got horror elements in it, but just The Burbs, the Tom Hanks film, with it's got Carrie Fisher in it. It's just a great film. Like it's funny, but I think for me it's more of a parody of horror films and human paranoia than anything. Because I think turn of the 80s and into the 90s, that's when horror films really started to begin self-parodying themselves. And for me, The Burbs was like one of the best ones that kind of does that. Really kind of picks at the elements of what a horror film is. And I don't know. It's a good funny film. I mean, it very much is a comedy, but again, I think for me it's worth mentioning because to me it definitely hits on those beats of kind of not really mocking or calling out, but playing homage to what made a good horror film in the 80s. And the cover of it alone for the longest time always eluded me because it was Tom Hanks standing there, and you've got like the the clouds and the lightning in the background, that kind of painted mansion, that very, you know, askew paintings they used to do of movies back in the 80s. And I think that alone stood out to me for a long time before I realized it was a straight comedy. But, you know, the same thing with the Cable Guy in the 90s. Like, the cover of that film makes it look like it's a horror film, but it's a straight up comedy, too.
Oh, sure.
Yeah. Chris, what would have your pick been?
I would probably pick Pet Cemetery.
See, I'm not a huge fan, but I could see that. That's probably the highest grossing horror movie that year, or close to it.
Well,
It
I
came out
just thought for
Yeah.
I thought Fred Gwynn's performance alone was worth it. I thought he did a really good job.
Chris loves the slashers. Apparently, you love slashers too.
I do, yeah.
Yeah. Well,
I think
Michael,
the
do you want
the best.
to close this out?
Oh, yeah.
Of course, you can always find us on social media. You can find us at VHS_podcast on Instagram. You can find us at Facebook.com/Video Horror Show Podcast. And Chris, what's Twitter?
VHS Podcast 1.